Our next speaker is, and I hope I pronounced that correct, Jordan Koene. Is that correct, Jordan?
That's correct. Yes, you got it. Nailed it.
Correct. Perfect. Great. So Jordan was the CEO of Searchmetrics, Inc. for almost 3 years, and he has been an advisor to our company ever since. Today, he will present to you the engineer's playbook to enterprise SEO, as he will unpack the top 5 tactics engineers can use to leverage and implement SEO correctly. He will also review critical skills like refining SEO tickets and performing advanced AI and machine learning tactics in order to scale your SEO operations. So without any further ado, please welcome Jordan Koene, and it's great to have you on board.
Thank you so much. Really excited to be here. Thank you to the Searchmetrics team for putting this together. It's never easy to get a virtual event off, but hopefully everyone's back from the break, super motivated to dive into something that I think is a really critical component to how we go about our work, right? The reality is that, engineers at the end of the day are the critical, backbone to how great SEO work gets done. Now, there's obviously a lot of different players at stake when it comes to SEO, but in particular, working with engineers and getting work done effectively with engineers oftentimes has the biggest output and yield when it comes to SEO. And so this presentation is generally about that topic. However, for those of you who are either at agencies, at small businesses that might use a standard CMS, a CMS like WordPress, no need to worry. I've actually incorporated many themes and topics that will be incredibly valuable to your work, and also provide you with some great tips on how to go about doing your work. So let's dive into the engineer playbook. And let's take a look at some of the insights and ideas that we're going to review today. So the first topic we're going to look at is integrations to learnings and how you take data to make it a useful learning across your organization. The second one that we're going to look at is specific technical insights and how you do that with engineers. Writing better tickets. Actually, this part of the presentation is my favorite because these are real world tickets. I've actually taken real tickets that were written and I'm showcasing real examples that all of you can hopefully leverage and use and maybe adopt as you go about doing your work. And then we're going to dive into those SEO tactics that was mentioned earlier, and then I got a few closing remarks. So before we get started into the nitty-gritty details, I wanna address a really important concept, which is the idea of starting with why. So there's this author, Simon Sinek. He's a great leadership and business author, and he created this model that's called the golden circle. And the golden circle essentially is the concept of ensuring that whenever you're working with teams or partners, your boss, that you start with why. You actually answer the why question first, and then work your way out of this circle. So you go to how and then what. And the reason I'm presenting this to you is because ultimately, for us to become far more effective SEOs, far more effective marketers, far more effective leaders, we must always start with the most important question, which is why. And the reason it's the most important question is that this is what inspires other people to do work. This is what inspires other people to take action or be engaged. So if you can answer why, you're going to be far more effective than telling people how to do things or what you want done. And unfortunately, most of us spend a lot of our time on the how. We spend a ton of time telling people to do this and to do this. All of you SEOs who are listening, this is the SEO checklist, or this is the wiki page, or the summary that you send in the email, how I want something to get done. And obviously, there's an ambition, there's a desire to have results. Everybody wants to have results. But the reality is we often forget the why. Throughout many of my slides, I'm going to start answering the question why. And the why you should listen to this presentation is because at the end of this presentation, my objective is to make you a better SEO. My objective is to make you a better marketer. And ultimately, I want you to be more effective in working with your teams and your boss. So that's why you should listen to this presentation. So let's dive into the first section of this, which is integrations to learnings. Integrations to learnings is the idea of how we enable data, right? So enabling data is very different than collecting data. I'm actually going to talk about that later in this presentation. But enabling data is the concept of how do you get it useful to work with different teams like engineers, or how do you summarize data or information so that a stakeholder, someone who knows nothing about SEO, some management personnel or a content partner or a PM that has never worked with SEO, how do you make them understand the data? And this is really critical, whether you're working within small teams or large teams. It is absolutely critical to be able to understand how to create these integrations in order for you to scale. The reality is that most of us start this journey off on the wrong path. We start this journey off on the path of, I need to be able to visualize this, or we try to just give people access to things like Search Console. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, because Search Console actually, to someone who doesn't know anything about SEO, is incredibly confusing and very hard to understand. So we often start this journey of integration to scale on the wrong path because we don't actually answer the why, and we don't actually understand who the audience is. And so I have a couple of real world examples. I'm going to go through 2 real world examples. By the way, there are QR codes in this presentation. By all means, you're welcome to try to take a snapshot here on 24. But if you can't get the QR code here when the slides and the packet is delivered afterwards, by all means, you can take a snapshot of that and you can go to the URLs where many of these assets are and you can download them and use them. So the first one is using crawl data. And crawl data is obviously a really critical component at an enterprise level. So that's why I'm using this example. But when it comes to this particular template that we created, this is identifying, it's the ability to identify and fix issues before they cause a decrease in traffic. What we're actually doing with this template, and I have screenshots coming in the next slides, so don't worry, I won't leave you hanging. The idea is that by tracking crawl data over time and identifying thresholds for different types of issues, you're ultimately going to be far better at forecasting and predicting when an issue might be when an issue might need attention. And so ultimately, this dashboard we created integrates all this crawl data, organizes it in a way where there's certain thresholds, and then allows us to have a very effective communication plan with different stakeholders and partners. The reality is that, crawl data is very complex. Like what we often do as SEOs is we say, hey, I got all these soft 404s. I got this huge list. You download the list and you send it over to somebody. That actually doesn't create any inspiration for someone to work on it because it doesn't tell anyone anything. It just says, I have a whole bunch of errors. But if you actually have a trending of soft 404s or a trending of redirects, and you understand that you're reaching certain thresholds, like it's increased by 10% week over week for 2 weeks. When you go back to an engineer and you say that, when you go back to your partners and you say, hey, I've had a 10% increase week over week in 404s or in redirects, it changes the conversation because you've actually identified a critical data point and connected it to the ultimate desire, which is we want to do something before it causes a decrease in traffic. So here's the example of this dashboard that we've created. And this dashboard essentially has a bunch of different categories of server and crawl data that we analyze. And it's then organized on a week-to-week basis, as you can see on the right-hand side. And then when certain thresholds occur, we prioritize them based on impact and effort. And we can alert to teams, hey, this is a high impact problem and it's a low effort to fix it, please address, right? And it really changes the narrative greatly. We also created aggregate composite scores because there's so many people who don't understand crawl data. And then we can put this into a dashboard where we can actually see how healthy the entire site is. This is what we send to managers and leaders who know nothing about what a 404 is, because we don't want them to know what a 404 is. But what we want them to know is our site is really healthy. But guess what? 2 weeks ago, it wasn't very healthy. It was down to 80%, and we got it better. This is the kind of integration of data that changes the narrative and the outcomes of who you work with. So very quickly, I'm going to give you another example here of this concept of integrating data to be more effective in your work within an agency or as an SEO at an enterprise. And this is leveraging Search Console data. I mentioned it earlier. Search Console is, it's a little more than I think most people can comprehend. As SEOs, for all of the listeners who are SEOs, we play in Search Console every day. But for those people who are not in Search Console every day, this is a very foreign set of data. This is a very confusing set of information, and there's very little that you can actually garner from it without having that deep understanding and knowledge. So the why behind building this dashboard, building this tool or pipeline, was that we could provide deeper understanding of how Google changes impact the performance on a website. And this, and again, I have screenshots for everybody here, but this particular integration and setup really allowed us to look at very granular sets of data that come out of Search Console and automate this process. And that's the best part, right? Is we don't need, as one SEO in an organization, now I don't need to update this every day. I don't need to log into Search Console, pull down the report, organize it in a Google Sheet, send it to this content person or this engineer. All that is done and automated. And essentially what it does is it informs decision makers, informs partners of what is happening on our site and unlocks them to doing work. This is a project that was done with a partner called 2 October, so credit goes out to them. And again, the QR code here will bring you to the template that we co-created. And essentially what you can see in this template is we pipe in this data from Google Search Console, and using some specific rules or regex processes, we're able to then organize different data that comes from Search Console in a more useful way to the organization. I think one of the ones that I want to highlight here is how we leverage question searches as well as site structure and zero-click data to better inform the engineers about how to leverage FAQs on the site. And that is a very powerful narrative that doesn't just come out automatically from Search Console. If you can go to a PM or a partner or an engineer and say, hey, I understand that these are some of the question searches that are taking place and driving traffic to our site. By the way, I also know that some of these pages are getting 0 clicks, or we want to get more 0 clicks. Can we change or modify or improve the questions that show up on our site to gain more traffic? This is a much more effective narrative than just trying to send spreadsheet upon spreadsheet of data. And then also having this data in a trend analysis gives you far more insight than just sending over raw data. So let's talk about insights, and let's talk about specifically technical insights. Technical insights, I think, are one of the most challenging places to have effective conversation. I am sure that every single person on this webinar knows full well that when you go to engineers, you better have a really bulletproof story, because they're always going to want to poke holes at it. And I know I have felt that in my career. I'm sure many of you have felt that challenge. For those of you who work at an agency or work at a smaller business where you're dealing with a CMS, I'm quite certain that you've had these conversations where you're either going to your partner, your provider, or you're working with your client, and you're really trying to unlock the effort that's necessary behind a technical change. So we're going to talk a little bit about that process and how to be more effective at it. So the process is really centered around the collection of data, but doing it in a way that provides a framework for all the people you're working with. And this framework has to have a little bit of structure to it, right? And that structure comes from first understanding the core technology you're working with. So the reality is there's only certain insights that you can genuinely garner or influence. And so you want to be able to organize your insights into these buckets, right? So for example, if you are working with a third-party CMS, like a WordPress or a Contentful or a Webflow, you can't change all of the core technology, but there are certain very specific elements that you could possibly change on a front-end experience to improve your overall technical health. So understanding the core technology and the limitations is the first step to this process. The second step to this process is ensuring that you're collecting reliable data points that you can align across the organization. Reliability is, first thing there is, it's something that you can collect over and over and over again, and it's the same set of data over and over and over again. It's not going to change dramatically from one week to the other because you're pulling in a different data source. So for example, if you're trying to collect core Web Vital data, you have to be able to collect that from the same set of pages week over week over week and not change the pages, because then you don't have any consistency in the data that you're collecting. Finally, you have to define competitive data to unlock your teams. And for me, that's the most powerful piece of technical insights and the one that's often overlooked. Most of the time as SEOs, what we try to do is we try to just punt over data about ourselves. Our website core Web Vitals went down. Our website has all these errors happening. That's fine, but it doesn't have any backdrop. It has no reference point to the competition or what's happening in the market. So again, we need to understand the core technology, we need reliable data, and we need to incorporate competitive insights to unlock our teams. So let's take a look at an example of this. Before we get into that, there is a process of then, once you follow those rules, you have to capture the data, visualize it, and then start asking the question of what next with these partners. So there's a little bit of a work that needs to be done to do this, but here's an example real quick. So we leveraged a front-end capture tool, and there's a ton of these out there. I put 2 links to some examples, one that's on GitHub and this other one called CLS Capture. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to work with this different design and engineering teams to solve technical challenges that were happening on the front-end experience of this large website that we were working with. So what we built was the ability to capture this data and to capture it over time and store it in a library. And the reason we wanted to store this in a library is because we wanted to do 2 things. We wanted to be able to show the changes that happened over time, and we wanted to be able to compare this to competitors in the market during those same times. So we recorded this data using other tools and third parties. I put a couple of those third-party tools, and I do have some screenshot examples, Treo, LogRocket. There's, again, many of these different types of tools out there that help you capture these core Web Vital or other performance indicators, design performance indicators, and we collect and stored this data. What we were able to do by combining these 2 things is, again, create a dashboard that allowed us to see a macro view of performance. This is an example of it. Honestly, this particular project, nothing reached 100, and almost nothing was 100, was green. But what we ended up doing was we collected those CLS files, those front-end capture files, pulled out the scores, created a table with all those scores, as well as then collected competitive data to then be able to compare ourselves on these core Web Vital CLS KPIs. Here's an example of monitoring. Again, this is just a screenshot. This isn't the real example. I think this is the one from Treo, where we looked at different competitor pages, had a set of pages that we were looking at, and then analyzed the trend on specific core Web Vital KPIs over time. The idea here is, by leveraging these tools, organizing our work to collect insights, we were able to have a far more effective conversation with design teams and engineering teams about how to improve the front-end elements. We were also able to have executive conversations about our ad strategy, because ads were coming up in all these different places and causing friction at different points in time over the period that we were collecting this data. And finally, we were able to really motivate the teams using heat mapping data to move social buttons and other elements on the page further down to ensure that users were gaining access to the content and the material much sooner on the page. The only way we were able to do this, though, was by our through our ability to collect technical data and provide them these insights over time. All right, so now we're going to go into my favorite section of this presentation, which is the ticket creation. I might have to go pretty fast here because I have about 15 more minutes, but happy to answer any questions about these. And again, everyone's going to get access to these real-world tickets. So first of all, we need to stop everything that we're doing when it comes to tickets. When we're working with engineers, we need to be able to create solutions and focus more on the opportunity and the problem. This is easy to say, but it's incredibly hard to do. Unfortunately, many tickets that I see that are submitted to engineering partners are very focused on the tactic or the task. I want you to do X, I want you to do Y. But what we fail to do is we fail to incorporate opportunity. Why is this really a big opportunity? Or we fail to incorporate acceptance criteria that really says, that really defines what the completion of this work should be. Again, this is easy to say, it's really hard to do, but in order for us to become more effective, whether it's as an agency working with our clients, as an in-house SEO, working with engineering teams, we need to be able to focus on the opportunity and the problem more so than the actual task at hand. So a couple of real-world examples. This is a real-world example from a really large, publicly traded, hundreds of millions of pages website. And what this ticket is, and what you can tell from this ticket, is that this ticket was created a long time ago. So if you look in the bottom left-hand side, or right-hand side, I'm sorry, you'll see that this ticket was first created in 2015. So over 7 years ago, this ticket was created. And this ticket was the birth of title experimentation at this company. And when you have hundreds of millions of pages, many of them user-generated, the ability to have a title experiment platform is absolutely critical to the long-term success of this company. And what I want to highlight here is the goal. And the goal basically states that this ticket is just about the requirements, the simple requirements in order to build search title SEO experiments. This ticket isn't to say we're going to build the whole thing today. Nope. All we're doing is we're working with engineering to capture the requirements of what we need in order to do this. And I think this is a really valuable ticket. It even stipulates that, hey, the outcome here is very unclear. We're still not entirely sure what the outcome of this is, but we want to do this work. And we want to make sure that we capture the requirements to get to a place where we have an effective title experimentation platform. So I wanted to highlight this one because for all of you who are listening, you're like wondering, why the heck are you showing me a ticket about something that didn't actually impact SEO? Because the outcome of this long term was monumental. I mean, the outcome of this is hundreds of millions of dollars in improved CTR from changing titles. But it started from this place. It started from this place of discovery and of learning to ensure that we had the right requirements to build the platform. Okay, so the other example I have here is a list of tickets. And this list of tickets is related to our ability to collect data in order to improve our sitemaps. And the reason I'm showing you this is because, and I highlight the 460, because again, oftentimes we create all these tickets. We say, hey, we want all these things done, but we don't actually know the organization of doing this work. So you see the traffic ticket 460, that was the one that was created first. But in reality, what we did is we started with 490 because we needed to validate the list of URLs before we could actually understand and update them to be specific to certain locations and businesses. And so one of the things I think often as SEOs we get really hung up on, and the learning here is that we get hung up on that the work needs to be done in a certain order. You can reach the same outcome through a different path. And you need to be flexible enough to know that the work might get prioritized differently once it gets to engineering. And your ability to be flexible because you know what the outcome is really critical. So this is another real world example of duplicate content on a community website. And the reason I love this is because, again, it's a community website. So tons of UGC, right? And stuff that the SEO team generally doesn't control, right? Like they can't actually change the content. But they wanted to develop a strategy to get rid of the low quality content within this community part of their website. And what I love about this is they didn't necessarily try to force function the work that needed to be done by the partner. The partner being the community team and the support team that manages this part of the website. No, instead what they said is, we're going to create a guide to improve the content quality through different linking opportunities. So they got very specific, created criteria, acceptance criteria, that they went back to the community team with and said, hey, we're not here to tell you to remove these 5,000 and get rid of them. No, we're going to give you a guide, and we're going to give you the process by which you can go to achieving this goal and this outcome. And I love this ticket because it showcases that sometimes when we write these requirements for our partners, the requirement doesn't have to go to the extreme level that we think it needs to be at from an SEO perspective. Sometimes we have to get to the path of educating and teaching people to then cross the line of actually implementing these, critical changes, like we want to no index these pages or we want to deprecate these pages. Yeah, absolutely. We may want to do that, but the first step might be teaching them and educating them around the value of that. And then the last ticket here is around low traffic pages and how a team would deal with very low traffic pages and the process by which they're going to go about doing this. And the reason that I really like this is that all of us as SEOs, we all have our templates, right? We've got our spreadsheets, our content briefs, our technical checklists, our wiki page templates, and that's great. Oftentimes, all you have to do when you're really creating these tickets and communicating with the rest of your organization is say, hey, I have these templates, and in order for this work to get done, there's a set of tasks that need to be completed to understand the outcome. And that's what this ticket is really about. It's like, hey, I got these 2 templates, engineering team or partner team, go fill this out and tell us what pages we should keep, kill, update, remove, and then I will coordinate as the SEO to get that work done, right? I think that's a very different approach to work than what we typically take. And I encourage everyone to try this because it really enables teams to be far more committed to the SEO process. So a couple of things as takeaways and what we should start doing. First of all, let's make sure that we have clear, simple goals and objectives. Be flexible in the plan. Remember, I showed that example of moving tickets around, and sometimes the sequence of work needs to change. And make it absolutely clear about what your intentions are and set really good acceptance criteria. This will make you far more effective when it comes to building tickets and creating this communication and collaboration, not just with your engineering teams, but in many cases also the requirements that you have with your content teams, product teams, and even management teams. All right, so here we go into some of the key tactics. I'll probably get through this in a couple of minutes and hopefully leave some time for some Q&A. So the first one is this tool called Built. So Built is a third-party tool that allows you to capture data about the technology that's being used on other websites. So are they using Google Analytics? Do they have any other tracking softwares? What's their CMS? Do they have third-party partners that they might be working with? And what we worked on is an automation process where we can capture this for all of our competitors, because then we know what technology they're using on their websites. Super insightful. And if you have a small website, if you have like a small WordPress website, this is really powerful because it gives you clues into what's on another company or competitor's website that might enable you to be more effective, because oftentimes the competitive set is using the same CMS, but they're leveraging either different plugins or tools or compression applications that allow their site to be just a little more performant. So this is a great way to use a third party like Built, integrate this data into a spreadsheet, and now you can capture that data over time to understand what's on a competitor's website. Another component, very similar to one of the tactics I shared earlier around collecting data over time, is using film strips. I'm sure that many of you have used film strips to display to your managers, to your partners, what needs to be changed, because you can compare yourself to competitors with this. What we often fail to do is to keep this stuff and store this. I think that film strips are always great 3 months later, when you can either go back and give praise to the engineering team and say, hey, thank you for making these changes. Look at how more performant we are. Or the other case, which is nothing's happened. This is why we're not making any progress. But storing these film strip data is really critical. And then finally, the power of a competitive table. I haven't spent enough time talking about competition, but I really want folks to recognize that competitive tables are likely some of the fastest ways to get buy-in. If you can showcase yourself against competitors, whether it's based on ranking data, index pages, core web vital data, these are all different examples of that. Doesn't matter. Building competitive tables is genuinely your unlock to getting more work done and getting buy-in from executive teams and other partners. So lastly, with just a few closing remarks, I hope that you found some great tactics and ways to unlock your technical teams and SEO projects. Remember to create simple goals, flexible plans, and complete your requests. Make sure that you are really clear about what you want done, what that acceptance criteria is. And don't forget to connect the past and the future. I had a lot of examples in here about how we would collect data, aggregate that data, and then provide that insight over time. It's a far more valuable story and narrative. So very quickly, thank you to everybody, and looking forward to answering a little bit of Q&A here.
Thank you so much, Jordan. That was very well spoken and very, very well informative. Thanks a lot for the great presentation. Again, please feel free to everyone in the webinar to put in your questions into the group chat, so we are able to read those to Jordan. There is one question, the first one, that said, can you please give us a couple of examples where you had to interpret Search Console data for your clients, and how did you do it?
So one of the first
things, maybe talk a bit about the challenges that you met. So.
Yeah, the challenges, absolutely. So some of the challenges, right? I think first and foremost is using unified language. Just because something is described a certain way in Search Console doesn't necessarily mean that it translates to somebody you're talking to. Let me give you a super simple example. Impressions in Search Console is not search volume. It is also not the size of the market, right? It's not how many people are searching in Google. It is just the number of impressions for that particular keyword or URL in that particular position for that period of time. It's a very granular set of data, right? But it can be often misunderstood. And so I really think it's super important to get very, very clear about the words you're using, the terms you're using, and articulating that with the partners you're working with. So I highly encourage, one of the things that we do is we literally create like a legend, like, hey, these are important words to understand. And we describe what it is, impressions, what is it? Ranking, what is it, right? And we describe that very specifically when we send these reports over, or we put them into like the help sections in Google Data Studio reports. I hope that answers that particular question.
Yeah, I think absolutely. Thanks for that. Then there was another question. What would you recommend? Someone from India, for example, might have different preferences, like someone from France or anywhere else. How would you solve the problem to make it usable for everyone?
This is a tough question. I'm very fortunate. I've had the opportunity to work in multinational and international companies for a long time, and through those years, I've obviously learned how to adapt my messaging and, in many cases, the way that I display information with the partners I work with. I remember when I first started working with Germans in particular, I was often told to talk less and be more specific. So I try my best to be mindful of that.
I think please be more specific.
Exactly. Good timing. So in this particular instance, I think the important part is really spending the time to understand who your audience is. So sit down and just write the components of who it is you're talking to, what their role is, what their skills are, score their knowledge level, or even ask them, what is your knowledge level on SEO? And just and then put that Post-it note right alongside your computer to remind you every time that this is who you're talking to. This is who you're communicating with. I don't believe that there are obviously different cultural needs, but when it comes to SEO and technology work, it really does come down to zeros and ones. But the way we convey zeros and ones is very different. So I encourage you to spend a little bit of time organizing your thoughts about who that audience is and who you're talking to. Put that Post-it up, put that note up, and that should be a constant reminder for you.
Very well said. And maybe another practical question. There's someone who was asking, I have been planning for next year, and I find it hard to create alignment with engineering. Do you have any recommendations how to solve that?
Fire them all. I'm just kidding.
Tough ones here, Jordan.
Tough questions here. This is a really, really important topic, and it's probably very critical right now this time of year because plans are getting circulated and shared. Here's the first thing: start early. Start communicating your ideas early, even if they're just half of an idea. Oftentimes getting that buy-in earlier, listening to what your engineering partners want or need sooner will unlock your ability to get those requests in the future. And I really encourage, if you haven't had that conversation already today in November, then you're already behind. So go pick up the phone, go set up that Zoom meeting, go have that presentation, and it doesn't have to be done. I think that's the misnomer. A lot of us SEOs, we want this to be perfectly squared up and detailed before we present it. That's not useful. Get the information or the concept in front of them and then collaborate on working out.
Cool. I mean, I would like to interrupt you now, John. That was very nice. And
thank you for the specification, by the way. Yeah.
It was cool to have the right questions prepared for you to make you laugh and sweat a little bit, maybe, which is amazing.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for your time, Jordan. It was amazing to have you on our stage again.
Thank you.
Looking so much forward to next time.